Today in Empowering Workplaces, we're joined by Dr. Alexis Fink, a true legend in the field of industrial and organizational psychology, who has shaped workforce strategy at global giants like Meta, Microsoft, and Intel. Beyond her impressive expertise in data and analytics, Alexis is a leader defined by her profound empathy and a lifelong commitment to ensuring that the human remains at the heart of human resources. She joins us today to share how we can all advocate for our people and create workplaces where everyone truly belongs. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, the podcast where we explore how to create more meaningful, fulfilling, and productive work environments. I'm Sanja, an organizational psychologist, and we'll be talking with leaders, experts, and innovators who are shaping the future of work and sharing their stories on how we can all contribute to building a workplace where everyone can thrive. Whether you're an HR professional, a leader, or just someone who cares about making work better, I'm glad you're here.
What a marvelous introduction. I'm so honored. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
I could have said a million more things. Trust me, it was really hard to narrow it down. I could not thank you more for being with us today. You are somebody who I've admired for a really long time, and I've known about all of your accomplishments and the way you've made an impact in our field. And it's just been really wonderful to watch your journey. And recently, we were together in Austin, and you did a closing fireside chat with Richard Rose now. And I know I already told you a million times after that chat, but you just left me in an even bigger awe, and I didn't think that was possible. And such a big part of that is because you are so smart and you have so many incredible on paper accomplishments, but you have such a huge heart. And the stories that you share just really struck a chord. And I couldn't hurry fast enough to have you here and share your stories, because I do think that it's just such a beautiful combination of accomplishment and empathy and caring, and something that I think all of us in this field really strive for. So with all that being said, I have so many questions ready for you, but I know that my introduction didn't even really do justice to who you are. So I'd love for you, if you don't mind, before we jump into the questions, just tell our listeners who maybe don't know as much about you
Yeah.
as I do, a little bit about who you are and what you're up to today.
Yeah. So, a little bit in terms of professional background, I've had the great privilege to help organizations function better, either through organization transformation, organization development, people analytics, strategy, education kinds of work at Meta, Microsoft, Intel, and BASF. I've had a career that has really been anchored in making sure that work is effective and really thinking through how to use data at the intersection of work, working, and workers so that we can support thriving of the entire ecosystem, right? So we can really create rising tides that lift all boats. I am now in my post-corporate season, so I have the great privilege and opportunity to spend my time advising startups, doing some teaching, doing some writing and speaking, and some consulting kinds of engagement. So I'm just really deeply, deeply delighted to get to spend this time with you. These conversations are some of my favorite things to do.
Well, thank you so much. And how lucky are we now that we all have a little bit of your time now that you're, as you said, in your post corporate season? I feel like all of us are like, ooh, pick me. I want to do a project. So I think it's fun for our whole community. So you were mentioning, these big projects and organizations that you've worked with, and you've guided some of them through really massive shifts, from going through a global pandemic through the rise of AI. Looking back, which professional accomplishment are you most proud of? And maybe not because of the business win, but because of how it changed the lives of the employees.
So there are two examples that are fairly old, but both include a lot of elements that are relevant now. And the first one was a manufacturing example where this was a very old 100-year-old plant, 100-year-old equipment in rural Alabama. We made industrial coatings, and it was a really fairly unpleasant place to work for a variety of reasons.
Mm.
We built an agent-based simulation of the entire plant that looked at every task, every skill, how everything came together, and we essentially rebuilt the business processes in ways that reduced workplace injuries, in ways that reduced ecological waste into the waste flow because we weren't overproducing things, in ways that also, I think really importantly, massively reduced the cycle time, which meant that we could increase the output through that plant and meet all of our customer orders while really reducing overtime. And I was working, is when I was working for BASF. It's a very ethical company. So they were able to raise hourly wages in a way that we held W-2 wages constant. So the actual money you got at the end of the year was constant, but you didn't have to miss your kids' soccer
Yeah.
games on Saturday because of mandatory overtime. And you also were able to still have lower marginal labor costs because we were producing so much more. And it was a wonderful, wonderful example of how we were able to get a win for the company, a win for the environment, a win for customers, and a win for employees through the same set of deep workforce transformation activities. So that's one of my
Yeah.
all-time favorites. The other all-time favorite was a smaller example, and the best part of this example was, if you've ever spent time in manufacturing, you know that there's often, put it gently, a rivalry between the people in production and the people in maintenance, right? And so in this particular example, we were really changing the intersection between those two. And we had some folks in production that were doing some of the more straightforward maintenance tasks, the ones that, weren't having risk of electrocution, things like that. And we changed the way scheduling was happening and other kinds of things. And we also taught them a lot of like conflict skills where there was sort of clarification and planning and a variety of things that just really hadn't been part of their toolkit beforehand. And my favorite outcome, in fact, I made it the last slide on a deck of benefits that my team had done over like the last several years. This was my favorite one. My favorite slide was telling a little tiny story of that plant where we happened to have this maintenance and production case. And out of the guys in the production shop, they were all men. 3 of them had been separated from their wives when we started the project. And one of the wives caught me in the buffet at the Christmas party. I had no idea who she was. It was a little weird. This woman is like accosting me. And she's like, hey, I don't know what you did, but he's not an asshole anymore. And it turns out that like really getting hours squared away. So we wasn't getting like woken up at 3 a.m, really getting some of these conflict skills, really getting his work life to be less activating emotionally. So we didn't come home and like want to kick the dog, really changed their family life. And I started kind of poking around a little bit. And it turned out that out of the like 15 guys in the maintenance shop, 3 of them were in the middle of divorces when we started this project. And all 3 of them had reconciled with their families by the end of it. And so I sort of closed this on this particular deck about outcomes on this idea that we don't necessarily see all of these knock-on effects, but that they ripple out. And it's not, in that case, just the conflict scale. It was also the change in workforce and the work-family spillover where we weren't getting people to where they were just angry and hostile and combative all the time in their workday, so they could go home and have productive lives as members of the community. And it's like that work didn't cost us any extra. And the rebound was just tremendous. So those are my 2 favorites.
Oh, I love them so much, and I'll comment on the first one and then on the second one because I have so many thoughts. So for the first one, there's actually I don't know if there's been more talk in our the people analytics community about the impact on the organization and the impact on the individual and how do you look at that together. I think especially with the rise of AI and us having to be like so careful about decisions inside organizations. So I think the first example is so great because you said it was an organization and that environmental, a human impact. And so a part of the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I wanted people to regain hope that all of that is possible, that it doesn't have to be just organizational. We care about humans, but oftentimes to really get to that positive impact on humans, it's important to have some kind of an organizational impact, and for
Right.
how important it is for people analytics to understand the business,
Yes.
because oftentimes we can make such a bigger impact on the people and do something really positive for them if we can also show the positive impact in the business. But the only way we can do that is by understanding the business. Otherwise, there's going to be this disconnect.
I think you're exactly right. And part of what I see people analytics teams missing is they are looking really inside their own walled garden inside HR, right? So they're looking at the outcomes
Yeah.
that they can see in their systems. They're looking at the outcomes that they can measure, that they have control over. And that is very rational if what you are trying to do is have an outcome measure you can get access to. If what you're
Yeah.
trying to do is get as much done as you possibly can, and if you're trying to look for a big effect size, the closest one is going to be the biggest, right? All of those things are rational choices, but they're very
Mhm.
micro choices. And if we really want to
Mhm.
have impact, then we need to be willing to accept the fact that we might have 3 or 5 or 7% of the variance instead of 30% of the variance we can account for.
Mhm.
But if it's on something that matters to the business, that matters a lot more. And when I
Mhm.
teach sort of ROI, I always talk to people about the fact that you have to think in a portfolio of outcomes. So if
Mhm.
you don't have some things that your CFO would look at and say that is real, you're probably not going to last very long. And if you can get most of your projects to have things that your CFO will recognize as real, which means more revenue, it means less waste, it means higher contribution margins, it means things that are real, not just 15 minutes saved in terms of like 10
Yeah.
full-time equivalents, right?
Yeah.
Because if I can't reduce my headcount costs, then the CFO doesn't see it as real. If once you've established that, then you can buy yourself space to
Yeah.
say, and I'm also going to tackle this workplace injury problem. We're really going to look at
Yeah.
whatever these other problems
Yeah.
might be. Absenteeism is a real one. I think I shared with you when I was at Intel, weirdly for a while, the chief medical officer reported to me. It's very odd. I don't, that was sort of a curious choice. But very appropriately, we looked at our population and realized we had an awful lot of heart attacks and made a whole bunch of interventions. And we were able to get the heart attack rate down by 50%.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of this was process change, right? We had like health clinics in the cafeterias so you could swing by and get your blood work done. And we'd pay for a couple of personal training sessions and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of things to support people because all of that cost less than what you cost us when you were in a hospital after a heart attack. And all of that also saved people the trauma of having to go through a heart
Yeah.
attack, saved families the loss of having a family member that was debilitated or passed away, right? So it ended up financially beneficial to the company because most large organizations are self-insured. You're paying your own self-insurance costs. So we were able to reduce those. We were able to really increase service to a wide part of our population. And we were able to do things that were fundamentally human. You don't
Yeah.
have to choose. It's not a zero-sum game. You can
Yeah.
genuinely elevate on a variety of indices. You just have to be able to think about all of them at once.
Um, w- So I'm trying to anticipate maybe what our listeners would think about. And so my question would be, let's say I've been somebody in a role and I'm listening to and I'm thinking, oh, you're right. Like I really need to understand the business better. I need to do these things because I get that impact will be greater. I've been with my organization for a few years and now I feel kind of uncomfortable or embarrassed to approach someone and say, I don't know how something works. Like, is that going to
Mm.
make me look like, wow, what have you been doing here this whole time? Or how could you not know? I think that's a big part of, going out there with vulnerability, with admitting when we don't know something and being open. So two questions around that. If somebody is maybe in that kind of situation, what do you think would be a good approach of being more acquisitive and opening up to learn? And this one might be a tough one because I don't know if it really depends on the organization, but are there some like allies or mentors or somebody that would be more likely to help you learn the business that you would say these would be kind of a few different individuals or profiles that if you're in HR, I would recommend like you befriend to learn a little bit more about the business, or is it just too dependent, because like you were talking about like this, person reporting to, that's very unusual. Would that be, happen in many other organizations? No, but they were very helpful. So I don't know if it's like too broad of a question, or if there are a few individuals you would say could be good allies, and somebody actually taking that step to learn more about the business if they haven't already.
Yeah. So to the question of allies, I think there are usually three big categories of allies that are
Mhm.
important. And often people are very happy to play with you if you position yourself as
Mm.
solving their problems. So if you
Mhm.
come to somebody and say, do this for me, they may or may not be interested. If you come to them and say, hey, I heard you're working about this. I've got this part of that problem. I bet we could do something together. I bet I could help you look good, be effective. Is there a way that we can play together? Right. So if you approach someone in a spirit of, I want to help you, they tend to be more receptive. The three categories of folks, I think finance is almost always in that population, right?
Mhm.
Understanding how the money works, understanding what is actually driving revenue in this business. Not everything you do
Mhm.
drives revenue. So figure out what that looks like. Figure out where
Yeah.
your risks and opportunities are. Figure out what the nature of the conversation is. A lot of that can come from
Mhm.
finance, and there are a lot of places where you guys can join data. One of the obvious ones is attrition stuff, right? Finance really cares about that because that's the way they think about headcount cost. HR
Yeah.
cares about it for different reasons, but it's a place where you guys have mutual interests, right? So that's an easy place to start. The second place that is often helpful, depending on the organization, is your sales organization. Sales tends to have
Mhm.
great data, and it tends to be quite metric friendly in many ways. And some of that data can get so granular that it's really usable, right?
Mhm.
So the sales data can be really, really helpful. And it can be a place where you would have access to data that you could use as outcomes. So that can be really,
Yeah.
really valuable if you're trying to do good people analytics or workforce work. And then the third place, setting aside like whatever the nature of your actual business is sort of the operations, the machine that makes whatever the nature of your business is go. And that might be supply chain operations, it might be customer service operations. Like, I don't know what you operate, but
Yeah.
operations is often the place where you can get efficiency, where you can get scale, where it's often already being measured, and where there are people who are really interested in getting better so that they can take cost out of a business or increase capacity of a business, whatever your desire might be. And you tend to have less ego in the operations space than you do in like the core of whatever you're doing. Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to go to an engineer and say, hey, I think here's how you could engineer a project better. They don't super love that as an opening bid. But operations often is already dealing at scale. They're already open to
Yeah.
experiments. They're architected in a way that you can play with them really effectively. So if I was
Yeah.
going to point you to three places to sort of try to make a friend, those would be the three.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And that's where I love getting these conversations to very like from, big ideas to very tactical things, because I
Mm-hmm.
feel like oftentimes people will hear suggestions like, oh, but what do I do next?
Yeah,
So there you go. There you go. Three
there
three
you
different
go.
areas you can tackle. So you and I just saw each other at an employee listening conference, which actually
Yeah.
makes my heart so happy, because I think it was like first of its kind to focus on employee listening. And we know how it's important in work and life and everything to be able to connect effectively. So there is a lot obviously going on. And for somebody listening today that has different priorities and maybe has different budget strains, is trying to think like, what do I keep doing? What do I stop doing? Um, what would you say is one of the reasons why it's really important to listen to people, especially today? And how would you recommend for organizations to balance some of the tried and true methods of listening with maybe experimenting with some new ones? Because there are a lot of new ideas and maybe technologies on the market.
So let's answer the why question first, and then we can go to the
Hmm.
how question.
Yes.
So I think the why question, why is it important to do listening right now, is in part because there is so much coming at us so quickly, so much of the social contract, so much of affordability, so much of political instability, so much of technological innovation, all of these things have come at us at once in ways that suggest that, for example, you'll see leaders reflecting on their own experience when they were a new employee and believing that that is still relevant today, right? And so our mental models or our beliefs may not be relevant because the context has changed so much. And if you can get the leaders to acknowledge that the context may be different, then you can get them to be open to the idea that their lived experience is not super relevant. So the why is so that we are making decisions from an updated and relevant mental model, essentially, right? So what's going on? What are people anxious about? What's getting in the way of being effective? What's getting in the way of being effective at recruiting, at operating within our teams, at developing new products, like whatever you're trying to do, what are our blockers and how do we get rid of them? And listening can be an exceptional way to do that. I use listening pretty generically there. Pardon me. I use listening pretty generically there, and that's because there are lots of ways to do this. I kind of make a distinction between three things. Listening is one, which I think of as being verbal and intentional. Mm-hmm. Sensing is another, which I tend to think of as being maybe more behavioral. And that behavior can be digital behavior or human behavior. And then the third one is surveillance, which feels kind of creepy. And to me, the big distinction between the first two, the language-based versus behaviorally based ones, and then the surveillance one is an issue of basically consent. Do I feel comfortable with you listening to this? Have I agreed to this? Is this part of a public conversation, or do I feel like you're spying on me? And there is an extent to which, in a very legalistic sense, if you're doing something on a company-owned device, yeah, they probably have rights to look at it. But in terms of your lived experience, that's going to feel really different. And so really being clear in your how, what are you looking at? Why are you looking at it? Do the people know you're looking at it? Is it an appropriate and relevant thing to look at? And just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So that being said, if you can figure out what are those areas where you need new information, where do you have some sort of a vague signal that something is off, and how can you get better signal around that? I was talking to somebody just yesterday about how, like, I kind of asked, how does research work? Like, I love this question. But frequently, how research works is you start with something qualitative, and then you develop your hypotheses, and you build something quantitative to test those hypotheses in a scaled way. And then you go back to doing something qualitative to kind of sand off the rough edges, right? Yeah. And so in these spaces, I really think that you need to do the same thing. What is that kind of qualitative thing, that signal, that thing that's kind of in the ephemera that you want to test? Don't go ask 200 questions. Make sure that you are pointing at something. You should be open to new things coming in, but don't torture people with a million questions and hypotheses. Be kind of clear about something you are willing and able to take action on. Yeah. Go out and deploy the correct solution, whether that's a census survey, point solutions, something that pops up after a meeting to say, was that meeting useful? Something that sits in the performance management moment, whatever that moment might be, to get at whatever that question you've hypothesized around might be. And then you can sort of move from there to buff off the rough edges until you've got a good, useful answer.
Oh, I love that. I love the methodical, like very, like the right approach to the different steps. One, as soon as you started talking, you said something that has just weighed me down for many, many years, and I haven't found a solution yet. So I'm going to ask you for advice because it's also advice to me. You talked about maybe in somewhat different words, but like the way that people see the world or how they experience it, and really understanding that others can see it differently or they experience it differently. This has happened to me, and so I've admitted this many times because I want to create a safe space, that I'll be very confused about why somebody would do something or why they would think a certain way until it happens to me.
Yeah.
I'm such a jerk. I can't believe that it was so hard for me to put myself in this person's shoes, that I couldn't understand the situation at all, that it actually took me being in that situation to understand. And then on top of that, I'll say, well, I feel like I'm an empathetic person. I am a psychologist, I have a degree. And so if it's that hard for me, for the average person that's maybe not the most empathetic and is definitely not a PhD in psychology, like how difficult does this have to be for them? And so I think about that a lot in these workplaces. And the fact that, most executives are of a certain age, certain generation, have lived through a different world than where we're in today. And I know a lot of times we'll even think about, I remember I started my career around the time where we were like researching, writing all about millennials and these
Oh
people
yeah.
and what are they thinking? And now it's Gen Z and these people and what are they thinking? And but there's so much to learn, and I followed this woman who's a very strong voice in Gen Z, and she brings up a lot of points and say, like, do you understand what this market is like, and we're always hearing that we're going to be replaced by AI, and there are fewer entry level jobs and all these kinds of things. But I still think with all of that, there is a challenge for people to really per- perceive the world differently than just their own one way of perception. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
times it's really hard to initiate change because they're the ones that hold the power to, hold the budget, hold like this, the idea of saying like, yes, we're going to launch that project. And what have you seen be some ways that maybe somebody, aside from like what I was saying has happened to me, they're like, oh, well, once it happens to them, they'll be more open. So, what's a more effective way than waiting for somebody to experience the world differently, truly themselves, to be kind of more open to the fact that people are experiencing it differently than them, that they are a sample size of one, and they have to understand in their organization there are many different realities than the one that they live in.
That is
I'm not expecting like a crystal ball or a silver bullet, but
no,
just
it
some
is it's a
ideas.
difficult problem, right? And you're correct that there is something really powerful about experiences. And the rational economic man doesn't work so well. And so the thing of like, oh, this person should feel that way. And then you
Mhm.
experience it, and you're like, oh, now I know why it doesn't feel that way, right? Which is what you're talking about. There's something else that also happens where two people can experience the exact same thing and react to it really differently, right? Karen Snyder, who I absolutely adore, had a post recently about how her love language is being combative, right? Like when she wants to, when she really respects you and she's having a great time, she's getting into it and arguing about it, and that's fun and energizing and exciting, and that like she wouldn't bother to do it if she didn't respect you. And there are a lot of other
Yeah.
folks who like, oh my God, that feels like an attack. Get me out of here. So the exact same behavior
Yeah.
even can land really differently on people. And I think the only thing I've ever come up with to address the problem that you raise, as well as to a lesser extent, the problem with the story I just shared with Kieran. If you listen, hi, Kieran, I love you. You're amazing. The only thing I've come up with is to actually be able to manufacture those experiences. So if you're thinking about cross-cultural ones, I did some research at one point that said, hey, you can get an awful lot of the benefit by having somebody come for like 6-8 weeks, right? Part of it is they have to be in an apartment, not a hotel. They have to have a rental car and they can't Uber. They have to prepare their own meals. They have to go to a grocery store. They have to like actually live it. But you can get an awful lot of that knowledge through a fairly short, like mini expat assignment, right? You don't have to sell your house and move for 3 years. You can get a lot of that depth if you're starting up in a new country, for example. I've also seen really good success with shorter half-day, 3-day simulations where you can put people into, often it's a game, and it may be you're putting someone in a sort of lived experience of the pressure of having to address these constraints that aren't part of your day job. And there'll be some learning, et cetera. But those kinds of simulations can be really, really effective. And there has been some work with being able to use like augmented and virtual reality to put someone in the experience of someone whose life is just really different. The example that I've seen is be a person of color walking around a department store and being followed, right? And it's like, oh, I've never really thought about what that kind of side eye would feel to someone, right? And so being able to give someone like micro doses of what that experience is often enough to trigger it. More classically, there is really good research that has shown that even reading fiction can be a good way to build some of that empathy that puts you inside someone else's head what happened to me? How did I process it? What was this experience like for myself as a child, for kind of my community? What was this like? How did it land? And it can help people like empirically, demonstrably increase their empathy as well. And that's something like you can read a piece of fiction, you know, if you sit down and you don't have
Yeah.
kids bugging you, you can do it in an afternoon, right?
Thank you. Those are such amazing examples. And you had me thinking one for our organization, a big part of our workforce is in India, and what a different culture
Yeah.
than the US. There's
Yep.
something that was recently talking to a colleague, and he was sharing something with me about hiring or different things in the office. And I was like, okay, they make sense. And I'm like, that's legal in India, right? He's like, oh no, it's not only is it legal, but it's a best practice. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like, but I think without having those conversations, like a lot of times we just go in with the assumptions of how we've lived our lives.
Yeah.
And so but I love also like what you were saying. So I'm thinking like, oh, being able to, we were saying like travel and spend a few days somewhere is amazing. But if that's time prohibitive or or like whatever it is, even I've never thought about what you were saying, like reading a fiction.
Yeah.
Or what's interesting is like getting followed in a store. I mean, that to me, without taking a huge, digression to our conversation, like when all the DIB stuff happened in the
Yeah.
US, I just thought like people don't know. If people think that this is not a problem,
They just don't
man,
know.
like they're so not in touch with what different races, different genders experience. Like it's just, so thank you. Again, I thought those were like really good and practical tips and things that no matter what somebody's lifestyle or capacity for time or like how they can prioritize it, it's different
Yeah.
ideas that every single person listening, like they could find something that
Yeah.
actually um
Good.
works for them. So okay, I'm conscious of our time and I could talk to you
Excellent.
forever. So I'm like, what are the questions that I want to really come to? I'll go to this one and then we'll see. So it's hard to talk about this world, today without talking about AI, even though I'm pretty
Yes.
proud that most of our conversation we were not focusing on that, but we'll touch on it. So with AI becoming a core part of the HR toolkit,
Mhm.
I feel like there's a fear that the human and human resources is disappearing. What do you think are some ways HR professionals can use technology to actually become more human and more connected with people?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of interesting opportunities. We've seen that some of the AI tools can actually engage more empathetically than your manager would because they're not as pressed for time, right? So, what are the ways that we can help
Mm,
people make sure that they have a space that they can ask questions that would be embarrassing? Make sure that they have an opportunity to practice before they have a difficult conversation, which they might have been able to talk about a strategy for a difficult conversation with someone before, but now they can actually run it
mm,
5 times or 10 times until they actually get comfortable with it, right? So I think that
mm,
there's some genuine skill building and human capacity and support me in the performance of
mm.
my job kinds of capabilities that give people a sense of self-efficacy and success, and all of those are
Yeah.
wonderful things that can be enabled directly by technology. And we're already seeing examples where that's true. I think also there are a number of jobs that contain elements that are not super fun, right? They're very repetitive. I know I personally have done a lot of like 10 key data entry, and I will never get those hours of my life back. And I got nothing apart from dollars out of that experience, right?
Mm,
And so the opportunity to have less drudgery in work, if we can actually craft organizations that then are not
mm,
looking only to increase, and I'm using air quotes, efficiency
mhm,
by saying, here's what we did before, let's do less, and instead
mm,
do what the data is showing is a common outcome of saying our headcount capacity is X. If we can spend less time on this, that gives us the headroom to do more innovation, to add capacity, to deliver services at a higher quality level than we were able to before. And so instead of a race to the bottom, have an opportunity to have a race for the top, just a few weeks ago, the Digital Economy Lab at Stanford put out a great AI playbook. I totally encourage people to go look at it. And they found that among successful AI deployments, more than half of them were taking that strategy, where what it was doing was unconstraining the team. And I know in the teams that I've led, we've typically had 3 times the amount of demand that we could actually meet. And so by increasing efficiency, we would then be able to provide a higher level of service, a broader array of services, and help elevate the organization, as opposed to being in a position where it's like, oh, great, you now can code in half the time. Now let's take the team that was doing coding and we'll reduce them by 25% and we'll take some other stuff from over here and whatnot. So there really are excellent in-flight documented examples that show that smart organizations are the ones saying, I've been financially constrained to this level of headcount, and now I can deliver a higher quality product for that same headcount cost envelope. That's exciting to me, and I want to do that. So when I think about work being more human, that stuff is the stuff that people usually talk about as being rewarding, engaging, the stuff that they find interesting, and the opportunity to have more of that in our day, if well constructed, I think is really quite exciting.
Yeah. And as people think about that and those opportunities, I know today a lot of people I talk to are running around doing the best that they can, but still feeling burnt out because even in your, your own organization, if you're not talking about layoffs, but you're hearing it everywhere, and maybe your executive leadership never mentioned it, but these kinds of things are maybe looming, or maybe you did have to do a layoff. And God, like, I don't know many things that are more emotionally exhausting than that. For people who are, in HR, they're at this point feeling undervalued, feeling burnt out. What would you say, like, words of inspiration to remind them for why their work matters?
So there's really, really good research that shows that your colleagues can be a tremendous source of meaning. Making sure that you're supporting the people around you. And that can be really valuable to people. It's like, we are in this together. We are a team. We matter to one another. And that can be a great source of meaning, a great source of comfort when other things feel uneven. There are also really interesting research that talks about things that are very, very distal. I remember reading a study at one point. It was like New York City sewer workers had very high levels of engagement because they're like, look, without us, this city can't exist, right? We are keeping people healthy and safe and making this place what it is. Because again, without us, there's no New York City, right? Our work really matters. So sometimes finding the narrative about why your work matters to people who you might never meet, the theater goers or whoever else, right? That can also be a source of meaning. Meaning can be a little bit of a trap because it can get you so focused that then you don't do the things you have to make sure that you can stay healthy and safe. There's also a really interesting set of social psychological theories around identity. And it turns out that when people have a very narrowly described identity and something happens to that narrowly described identity, they just really fall apart. And so the more you can have a robust identity with multiple dimensions, the more you can have something to fall back on when something goes sideways. So if your only identity is as a worker and something is bad at work, then you don't have other sources of social support, or even other sources of your own identity development for yourself as a competent, worthwhile, and interesting person that really get you in trouble. There's this whole epidemic of a lack of third spaces in America, and we're seeing this in other countries as well. So what can you do to invest in a gardening club, a soup kitchen, a pickleball team, a play group, whatever your jam is, a running club, whatever your thing is? What can you do to make sure that you have a robust identity, a multidimensional identity that will help you take a deep breath, shift gears, not ruminate, have extra pillars of support if something bad does happen, and also have the sort of emotional strength and resilience to help navigate yourself through that period of time?
Oh, well, I'm definitely going to double down on that because as you're saying it, it's also something that's resonating with me because I don't know. I feel like I'm multidimensional, but I'm like, I feel like I could also do better and
Yeah.
be a part of more groups. And I think we all can. But what's interesting to me when you say it is I could also probably identified this mentality in a lot of people where for a while we thought like getting 8 hours of sleep, 7 to 8 hours, a night was a luxury and not like
Yeah.
a real health necessity. And so as you're talking about this, like with this increasing uncertainty on so many different levels, that is something an individual could control and it should not be perceived as a luxury. To me,
Yeah.
based on what you're describing and building those different dimensions is a necessity for our well-being, just for us to sustain today. And so I hope our listeners like really pause on this because I haven't thought about it the way you described it, and it makes so much sense.
You know, years and years ago, I went through a pretty horrible divorce. And at the time, I was really having a hard time sleeping. And the only way I could quit ruminating and fall asleep was play a little Sudoku. It was before everybody had a smartphone, so I did a little digital Sudoku game. And when I was able to go to sleep at a regular, normal time, 10 o'clock or something, I could finish my 1 star game in 5 minutes with no hints, right? I enjoyed doing this. I was good at doing this. It was enough time to clear out my brain so I could fall asleep. Terrific. When I'd been up way too late, if it was midnight or 2 or 3 a.m., and I was working at Microsoft at the time, so midnight and 2 and 3 a.m. meetings were pretty common if you're talking to someone in Asia, for example. So at midnight or 2 or 3 a.m., I'd pick out my little Sudoku game so that I could fall asleep, and it would take me 20 minutes, and I would need 3 or 4 hints. So the exact same task that I was expert at, that I did every single day by choice, and that I enjoyed, I had a 4x reduction in my performance based on having a brain that was currently not getting the rest that it needed. And when you
Mhm.
extrapolate that, we see this kind of thing in a variety of contexts where you can like count risks, crashes, and things like that. We feel like heroes when we don't sleep, and what we're actually doing. I have a friend who actually studied this. An overtired brain has a worse reaction time and less cognitive processing than somebody who's drunk. It's genuinely bad for you.
Whew. Wow,
Yeah,
that hits home. Hopefully people by now realize how important it is, but if you don't yet, if you're not getting your sleep, please listen to Alexa.
yeah,
That
yep,
that one definitely hits home. So as we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you one more thing.
sure,
For people in HR who want to continue to make a significant impact. So
yeah.
we're here, we want to make this world better, people's lives better. We want to have those stories you mentioned before of like, I mean, not only is work better, but like you sway from divorce of like how incredible is that? Um, what do you think is important for them to focus on? And let's just say over maybe the next 6 months, maybe a year tops, because really who knows after that. But in somewhat of the near term, what do you think people should be focusing and thinking about?
Well, the question you're trying to ask me is about a piece of content or something or strategy that they should focus on. And I'm going to turn it a little bit because for years, I've repeatedly demonstrated that the most important thing you can do is get really good at influence. And people think influence is
Mm,
about convincing or persuading, and it's not. It's really about
mm,
understanding what we need to do together, finding common cause, and joining forces towards a shared goal, right? That's the kind of thing we really need to get good at. You need to be willing to ask the questions that are important. You need to be willing to come off of your own position to meet someone else halfway so that you can move forward together. So if you have 6 months to work on something, I would say find those co-travelers that we've talked about and
mhm.
make sure that you are building common cause with folks, because more and more, as particularly AI infiltrates organizations, we're finding that you can't do it alone. So the more you can really build that community of practice, that community of shared interest, the more success you'll be able to have.
Oh, that's like a huge hug to my heart because that stands the test of time. And it's something that could have been said 100 years ago. And I do believe will be said 100 years from now. And with all the like flashy things or these urgent or, hot topics of the moment, I think that can get really lost. But I would say, I'm somebody that's lived on three different continents, made several different moves, many different countries. Like that community and the relationships and the way to communicate effectively, and have that influence is, I think, something that's kept me going and really helped, like in tough times, like elevated me. And so thank you for saying that, because I feel like it doesn't come up nearly enough in conversation, and it's so foundational. So
Well, thank you for being part of my community. This was a lot of fun today.
Oh, I mean, I knew that this conversation would be incredible. Again, you've exceeded all of my expectations. You're just truly one of a kind. I feel so very lucky to have been in places where our paths have crossed, and over the years we've been able to build up our relationship and get to this point. For those listening to us now, I have no doubt that people are, leaving inspired and maybe wanting to follow your work more closely, or have a conversation with you, or maybe work on a project together. Um, what's the best way to, maybe start to follow you in your work, or
Yep.
maybe get in touch if there's something interesting for both parties?
Bless you for asking. The easiest place to find me is on LinkedIn. There are not that many Alexis Finks. I'm the blonde one who does this stuff. Um, so that's the easiest and best place to track me down. And pretty much anything else I'm doing will kind of come back to that central hub.
Wonderful. And I mean, your contributions, I'm on LinkedIn pretty much every day, multiple times a day, and you put out such incredible content that I love. It's very real and thought provoking. So yes, I would say,
Well,
even for somebody that's maybe doesn't have a project or a collaboration top of mind now, I would definitely say, if you don't follow Alexis, I would strongly encourage it, because you will be a better person for it.
thank you.
Absolutely. Alexis, thank you again from the bottom of my heart. And you have so many different things going on. I think this conversation was so incredibly valuable to me, and I know it's going to be valuable to a lot of people listening. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the way that you show up to our community. It's really and it should go without saying, but I do want to take a moment to just, really
Oh,
appreciate everything that you do.
you are so kind. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the next chance to see you.
Hopefully
All right.
soon. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.